Welcome to the Middle East and Africa Forum for Sustainability Leaders, a podcast series where we take a deeper dive into the sustainability developments in the region and the top-of-mind challenges faced by sustainability professionals. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage, also known as CCUS, is gaining a greater spotlight as a potential set of technologies that can slash the carbon emissions by directly capturing carbon from the air and accelerate the journey towards the net zero. Today, we're going to shed some light into the critical question: how can the Middle East and Africa scale up CCUS technologies to accelerate the journey to net zero? I'm pleased to welcome our three featured guest speakers for today: Dr. Tidjani Niass, Senior Strategist Sustainability at Saudi Aramco; Adam Siemiński, former President and Senior Advisor to the Board at King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center, CAPSARC; and Dr. Mohammed Abu Zahra, Head of MENA Region at the Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute. Dr. Tidjani, I'd like to kick off with you. I'd like to asking you about your opening thoughts on the topic of the question, based on your experience leading Saudi Aramco's CCUS initiatives, the largest oil producer in the world and one of the largest advocates for CCUS technologies. I welcome your opening thoughts into the question of today's topic.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. So I think this is a timely topic as CCUS much more momentum at a global scale, and which is also translated in the region with some concrete projects that I'm sure we'll be discussing in the conversation later on. In Saudi Arabia, in United Arab Emirates, in Qatar, there are interesting projects being developed, which will put the region in a position to be leading in the space of CCS. So very much excited to be here today and then discuss with my colleagues about CCS. Thank you.
Excellent. And let's welcome Adam Siemiński, former President and Senior Advisor to the Board at CAPSARC. Adam, I welcome your opening thoughts on today's question.
Well, Ignacy, I think that it's very important to realize that many forecasts for fossil fuel consumption over the next 10 to 20 years suggest that they'll go up. Just as an example, oil consumption is higher in 2022 than it was in 21. It looks like 2023 is also going to be growing. And the reality is, if we're going to tackle the greenhouse gas management issues, we have to find a way to make fossil fuels or hydrocarbons more friendly. And that is happening in a number of places around the world, and in the Middle East is no exception. So I think that keeping in mind that things like carbon capture and even nature-based solutions to carbon dioxide removal are going to be very important as we move forward in greenhouse gas management.
Certainly. And Dr. Mohammed, I'd like to bring you in and ask you about the opening thoughts on today's question as well. Of course, you're the head of MENA at the Middle East and North Africa at the Carbon Capture and Storage Global Institute, a think tank whose main goal is to accelerate the deployment of these technologies. What are your opening thoughts on today's question?
Yeah, thank you, Ignacy. I think it's a timely and important subject to talk about how CCS will evolve in the MENA region or in the Gulf region as well. From what we have seen over the last couple of years globally, the interest and number of projects announced around CCS are increasing. And if you look at our status report 2022, the global capacity of announced project increased by more than 45% in comparison to 2021. So that's a major global step, and the interest is increasing in the technology in carbon removal and CCS from a point source. And the MENA region is not an exception. We have seen many announcements from different governments and commitment from oil and gas companies and energy companies, and that we will talk more about, but there is the ground for accelerating the deployment of CCS in the MENA region more and more in the coming years.
Certainly. And Dr. Tidjani, I'd like to go back to you and ask you about the state of maturity of CCUS technologies. We've seen there are about 3 projects in the region, and most of them are still at pretty much a pilot stage. Where do you see the maturity? How is this maturity of technologies evolving, and what would it take for CCUS to take off eventually?
Yeah, so thank you very much for the question. So I'm sure Mohammed will be providing some insight, on how CCS is developing at the global scale. But I want to bring more regional-based perspective on my views how CCS is evolving. So as you know, CCS has been always of strategic importance in the Middle East for obvious reasons. Middle East countries share significant endowment of hydrocarbon resources in the form of oil and gas, which has been the key building blocks for economic growth and prosperity in the region. So actually, if you look at electricity generation, water desalination, air conditioning, industry, agriculture, and most economic activities have been dependent on hydrocarbons, although renewables energy are growing very fast also in the region. So CCS, as has been said by Adam, is the only technology that can help reduce emissions across economy in the region, while also preserving the life of existing assets and achieving decarbonization target at least costs. So if I zoom into Saudi Arabia, there are several industrial clusters with concentrations of high-emitting industries from oil and gas, petrochemicals, cement, power, and others, where synergies could be maximized through CCS hubs, where the CO2 transport and storage infrastructure is shared. So we are exploiting this concept of CCS hub in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, in Jubail, where a first large-scale CCS hub of 9 million tons per annum is being built and will be operational by 2027. So, but I think this is just the beginning for scaling up CCS in Saudi Arabia. As my own company, Saudi Aramco, we have a target of achieving 11 million tons per year by 2035, and the kingdom has a very ambitious plan of 44 million tons by 2035. So Mohammed will tell you that today's global capacity is around 40 million tons per year. So actually the kingdom target is equivalent, is actually more than today's installed capacity, and will be a very big contribution in scaling up CCS. Other countries can learn from leading countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar to establish also their CCS strategy and align also policies to make sure that across the border we have coherent policies that will maximize synergies between the countries. And then last but not least, R&D. R&D remain a very important topic because CCS, although it's very critical, the cost is still very high, and there is room for improvement in terms of CO2 capture materials and CO2 capture processes.
I'd like to follow up on that point you made about other industries, Tijani, about other industries that can benefit from CCUS. We've got in Saudi Arabia, the chemicals industry, the cement industries are very large contributors to the economy. Can these industries face a similar challenge? What are the challenges they might face at the time of implementing CCUS? Can we see a similar scenario to the ways it's been applied to for example, the oil and gas industry?
So look, the CCS industry is the CCS is not one single technology, and then the CO2 capture costs and challenges will be sector dependent, will be country dependent, would be policy dependent, etc. So what is sure that the oil and gas industry has the knowledge and the expertise across the entire CCS value chain, because actually in our business we have been separating different gases. So we transport huge amount of crude oil or natural gas, and then we have also expertise, in geoscience. So we are the only industry that knows what is happening, 1,000 meters below the surface. So this is not the case for a cement industry or for a power generation industry, which produce only electrons. So that's their core business. So which means that those industries would somehow have to work with oil and gas industries when it's come to deploying CCS technology to decarbonize their asset. And this is this is happening now almost everywhere, where ventures or CCS hubs are being developed, with each stakeholder focusing on what he can do the best. Okay, and there will be companies that will be in charge of taking care of the of CO2 injection.
Ignacy, let me just add to what Tijani mentioned, that to really get CCUS to develop properly, we're going to need robust MRV, measurement, reporting, and verification systems. And GCCSI has been working on that idea. Aramco is looking into ways to make sure that its projects meet international standards. And we really need a global agreement on that. It is probably going to be part of the negotiations taking place at Dubai at COP28. So getting that done is going to be really important. Tijani also mentioned what Aramco was doing in terms of carbon storage. Aramco, along with the Ministry of Energy in Saudi Arabia, announced a carbon dioxide hub to be constructed at Jubail, the industrial city to the north of Dammam, Dhahran area. And that'll be, they have a very interim goal. And I like the idea of interim goals because it suggests that the projects are real. You know, what's going to happen in 2035 or 2040 or 2050, who knows? But there could be 9 million tons of carbon storage available by 2027, and that's like tomorrow in the oil business.
And Adam, I wanted to bring you in to ask you about your expertise, your experience providing advice on economic energy policy. Which areas do you think the policy should focus in order to help CCUS take off?
Well, you know, you mentioned in earlier conversation that we need to look at mechanisms for putting a value on carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. That's really important. Most of the countries in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia for sure, doesn't like the idea of a global tax because they're not really sure that you could get a global agreement on that. But finding a pricing mechanism is certainly something that would be worth doing. I mentioned carbon hubs, mechanisms that would enable deployment are going to be very important. Government support, what the United States did, for example, in the IRA Act to encourage development of new technologies for carbon and greenhouse gas management is an important concept that's been pushed forward.
And do you see this kind of developments taking place today in Saudi Arabia or broader in the region?
Yeah, well, I'll let Tijani comment on that too, and I'm sure Mohammed's got some ideas. But yes, I mean, the idea of the carbon hub, there's mangrove restorations. I mentioned nature-based solutions as a way forward. They're looking at Saudi Arabia, for example, is doing a green, you know, what they say, the colors of the rainbow hydrogen, but a green hydrogen project with solar and wind in the Neom area. Aramco has done a blue hydrogen project with carbon reuse and sequestration. And that was done in conjunction with Japan and the shipment of ammonia to Japan. So the idea is there's lots of activities underway. The KAUST, the University for Science and Technology, has been experimenting with how to cure concrete with carbon dioxide, and finding ways to turn carbon dioxide into a valuable product rather than making it a cost center is going to be the key to deployment at scale.
Thank you, Adam. And Dr. Mohammed, I want to bring you in and ask you specifically about the role of the role of hubs and clusters as a model to scale up CCUS technologies. How can we maximize the impact these growth models can have on CCUS to bring it up to scale?
Yeah, thank you. I think the issue with CCS so far, we have, as we speak today, 35 operational projects globally. And as per the numbers we put together last week, we exceeded the 50 million ton being sequestered every year, which is a milestone to see that happening this 2023. Now, all of these projects so far has been a single project, single source, single pipeline or transportation, and then an injection site. We need to evolve into an integrated business models, and hubs and clusters offer that model. So we have multiple sources of emissions lined up all together, use the same unified infrastructure, which will help in reducing the cost, a common sites for the injection and the storage. We can benefit from the economy of scale for sure for the capture projects. And also that will help the industry and the government to engage in terms of like regulating a cluster, in my understanding, would become much easier for the government rather than dealing with individual points of project scattered all around the place. So regulation policy, building a business case for CCS, benefit from economy of scale and common infrastructure. And this is the motion where things are moving now globally. Adam Adijani mentioned the hub in Saudi Arabia. Similar work is going in Abu Dhabi to establish a hub. We have the hubs in the North Sea, in the UK, in Norway, hubs in the US, around Asia. So the whole concept is evolving into these hubs, and that will help us integrate the value of the carbon, integrate carbon dioxide capture with hydrogen production with other industries. So we can evolve into an actual business operational models.
Thank you. And I'd like to bring you back to Jani and ask you about that point you mentioned about the oil and gas and other industries collaborating to scale up advanced CCUS. What is how do you assess the role of partnerships in advancing the CCUS technologies?
Well, partnership is absolutely critical. So and should be driven by a single aim, which is to align all stakeholders on a common goal. So the concept of CCS hubs actually rely mostly on partnership where small emitters can even join the game and without having to invest in the CO2 transport and sequestration infrastructure. Now, if I go back to Saudi Arabia, I think I was very excited to be part of a very comprehensive scheme across multiple stakeholders in the country through the circular carbon economy national program, which Adam was a very key member on. So we had this conversation on how really to put in place a comprehensive strategy with clear roles and responsibilities across the value chain. So those were really the ingredients help us better understand what we need in order to achieve, to get to a point where we can make very clear public commitment on significant CCS project in the kingdom, in my own company, Saudi Aramco, but also at the national level. So partnership, again, absolutely critical, very important to align all stakeholders.
Can you tell us about some example about partnerships that Saudi Aramco is carrying out in this regard?
Well, we have the Jubail project. So the Jubail project will be a 9 million ton per annum by 2027, as it was mentioned. And this is going to be through a joint venture where we have a service company, SLB, and industrial gas company, Linde, working with Aramco under the joint venture to develop the CCS project in Jubail. So I think from this joint venture, you see really the skill set. Although we as Aramco, I think we have the capabilities to do the project by our own, but there is opportunity to bring in other industries like chemicals, like hydrogen production also, and to make sure that, we have a hub that match very well, the industrial city of Jubail.
Adam, I'd like to ask you about the financial and investment opportunities of CCUS. Where do you see these opportunities for investors? And also, what do you think it needs to, for CCUS projects to attract more, to unlock more investments? Is it a matter of technology not being mature enough? Are there some risks that investors might wait before coming in to be mitigated or offset?
Well, see, investors are generally looking for a return, and that means, you have to be cost competitive. And many of the new technologies that will be critical in dealing with carbon management are still expensive. We have to bring the cost curves down. We managed to do that quite well with solar and wind, and same sort of techniques. That is government support at the beginning and incentives, which then lead to innovation. And each new project, the costs seem to go down, and that's the track that we would take. It would help, and companies can do this in conjunction with government, prioritize the solutions to make sure that we're getting the best abatement potential, the lowest costs, and that the technologies have the potential to mature. So R&D and pilot projects are going to be critical, and that's why the kinds of things that Aramco has been doing and ADNOC in the Emirates are critical. So one of the big CCUS projects in the UAE is the Emirates Steel plant, where they're capturing carbon dioxide and then using it for enhanced oil recovery. This is a great idea, gaining experience and the ability to improve the technology. That's going to be really critical. I wanted to mention a couple of things that CAPSARC is doing. One was actually in conjunction with the Global CCS Institute. What we did with the Global CCS Institute was we supported work that they did on trying to make a case that CCUS is ESG, environment, social governance, investing compatible. The amount of investment that we're going to need to scale up the technologies and even standard investment in oil and gas production is going to be huge. And we need to find some way to make sure that not just the renewables technologies, but all of the technologies that help with carbon management are compatible with ESG investment criteria. And there's if you go on the GCCSI website, you'll find a copy of that very important report that they did. And one of the other things that I want to mention, thank you to Johnny for mentioning the CCE concept. CAPSARC has also been working on something called the CCE Index. And the CCE Index is a way of comparing countries all around the world on how they're doing with both the current performance associated with greenhouse gas management, and then enablers that they've put in place, like investment initiatives and so on, to make sure that things can improve. It's not going to be a surprise to anybody that countries like Norway, Germany, the UK end up towards the top of this, index list. One of the things that has to be addressed, I think, at COP28 is that a lot of African countries, and this was supposed to be about CCUS and the Middle East and Africa. Countries like Algeria, Kenya, Cameroon, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Uganda are at the lower end of this index. So they're going to need some assistance, I think, to find ways that are compatible with their own economies to move things forward. One of the things that Aramco has been working on is a fuel initiative, cooking fuel initiative for Africa, to try to substitute propane, which is, a hydrocarbon, but much friendlier from an environmental standpoint than burning animal waste or deforesting areas to get wood for cooking. Again, it wouldn't be a surprise, and it's certainly not to us who are familiar with the Middle East, but countries like the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar are doing relatively well towards the, in the upper half of this index. And I believe that because of policies that have been put in place to foster initiatives in carbon dioxide management, that we will see the Gulf countries moving up even higher in this index.
Certainly. And Dr. Mohammed, I want to bring you in and ask you about the maturity of the technologies, and also about your previous experience as a professor at Khalifa University. Where do you see where do we need the talent to focus in order to contribute to develop this the state of maturity of CCUS? Where should probably education programs or future generations of technologies focus on to develop and advance these technologies?
Yeah, I think when we talk about CCS as a chain, we talk about the capture, transport, and the storage. The technology question and development is going more at the capture side. When it comes to transport and storage, I think it's more known the oil and gas sector has been transporting and operating CO2 for decades. At the capture side, we need to agree that the technology we have today is mature and is deployed at larger scale. When we talk about 35 larger scale operational project, we talk about each project at least 500,000 tons CO2 per annum, and that's a commercial scale. It's not a small pilot or demonstration, so we need to address that carefully. And so these technologies are very similar to the technologies used for the natural gas sweetening, for example, amine-based type of solvents. And this is what we call the conventional technologies available in the market from multiple suppliers. What needs to be done with these conventional technologies, they need to be improved in terms of efficiency to reduce energy demand and cost, a better integration in a process, improving that with a second generation type of solvents so we can improve the overall capture process. Now, at the pilot scale and R&D side, we have what we call the second and third generation technologies, which mostly going into solid sorbents, membrane technologies, hybrid technologies like suspension systems and others. And there are lots of R&D going on globally and in the region, like the work mentioned done at KAUST, the work we did and the team is still doing at Khalifa University, CAPSARC in Qatar, in many areas. Lots of work done on developing advanced solid sorbents, advanced membranes, with the aim to reduce the cost. So what we need to do now, we need to deploy more of the conventional technology to benefit from economy of scale and learn by doing to cut the cost. At the same time, invest more in R&D and piloting of a second, third phase technologies. Education programs need to go hand in hand. So we need to get more engineers with the typical engineering background in petroleum and chemical engineering, but to add into the element of CCS into their education. And there are many education programs evolving around that. Like at Khalifa University, we have developed many courses around CCS. Students do their research in the lab on carbon capture, different aspects of that. And that could be technology, but also need to go on the education with the soft tools like the policies and regulations, business models. All of these knowledge are needed to move forward with CCS. And we build on existing knowledge in the oil and gas sector and energy sector for handling CO2, for the gas separation in general, and so on. So there is more room for improvement, but we can build also on what we currently have at the different industries and different operations globally.
At a global scale, where do you see the Middle East and Africa compared to other regions where carbon capture, utilization, and storage projects are taking place?
I think we are doing well in terms of like when the region started talking about CCS. It has been a shorter period of time, but what has been achieved in the last 10 years or less than 10 years in the MENA region is substantial. When we talk about now 3 operational projects in 3 countries, commitments are very clear from the government and the national oil companies and the different industries in the region. We are moving, I think, in the MENA region in a very good base comparison to other regions. It's still, I would say, North America and Europe more advanced when it comes to incentives and policies. We have more a clear carbon taxation or tax refund related to CCS. That's still lacking in the region. We need to see kind of like these type of integrated models. But I think from a commitment point of view and the announcement and the plans for the project, we have a very good momentum in the MENA region, and it's very comparable to other parts of the world.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. And before wrapping up the podcast, I'd like to start a round of closing comments with each of you, starting with Dr. Tijani. Where do you see CCUS coming over the next 5 years? And what role do you expect it to have in the upcoming COP28 in the UAE?
I think CCS is really the missing element in the decarbonization puzzle. So that's the critical technology that really deserve much better focus from government, from industry to achieve their net zero target, because without CCS, all scenarios from IPCC, from IEA are saying that, we will not get to net zero. And it's not only about industry, but also it's about removing CO2 from the atmosphere, where CCS has a critical role to play through the direct air carbon capture. So, but having said that, right now, Mohammed will tell you that we are around 40 million tons of CO2 capture per year. So last year has been a fantastic year with 44% increase in the global capacity, which is now bringing the global potential capacity around 240 million tons per year when all these projects will be materialized. But if you look at the climate math from most of the credible scenarios, we need to get to the gigaton scale of carbon capture by 2030. So this gives you an indication of the challenge that we're facing, because if we say we need around 4 years to then for facility 3 years, Mohammed and his team will have to add each year 240 million tons of CO2 project into the pipeline. So that's really the challenge. So the CCS industry, build by 2050 will be at the scale of today's oil and gas industry in terms of volumes of CO2 handled. So that gives you the size of the opportunity and also of the challenge. I think I would not even say the next 10 years, the next will be critical for CCS industry, but also for the energy transition, because again, without CCS, there is no way to get to net zero. So we have really in the next 5 years to increase significantly this momentum. This would require aligning all stakeholders, having the right policies in place. The good news is that, in the United States, there are very strong instruments in place now that are catalyzing CCS, and those could be very good learning opportunities for regions like the GCC, which will certainly play a leading role in the emergence of the CCS industry.
And Adam, I'd like to ask you about your closing comments on today's topic. And you mentioned before that CCUS will need to be a critical topic in the upcoming COP28. And where do you see as well? What's your outlook for the short term?
Well, Ignacy, earlier in our discussion, you asked about partnerships, and Tijani mentioned the partnership that Aramco has with some electric utility in Japan to move on a CCUS hydrogen ammonia project. There are also opportunities for partnerships among countries, nations. And one of the interesting ones that's underway for the past 2 years is something called the Net Zero Producers Forum. The idea was generated at the Department of Energy in the United States, but the signatories to this is a very interesting group of countries, Canada and Norway, but Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, along with the United States. These countries together produce about half of the world's oil and gas, and they're looking to develop pragmatic net zero emission strategies. And I know this topic that we have today is CCUS, but one of the key things looking forward is developing methane abatement strategies. So methane abatement strategies and CCUS, these are very practical, doable emissions strategies, emissions control strategies that can really make a difference. So along with the concept of the circular carbon economy, reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove is where CCUS falls, and direct air capture and those sorts of things. These countries that are hydrocarbon producers are very interested in pushing kind of doable projects that will make a difference and get us to where we need to be in terms of managing greenhouse gas emissions.
And Dr. Mohammed, I'd like to bring you in for your closing comments on today's question. Where do you see carbon capture and storage going in the future, in the next 5 years?
I think the next 5 years are very critical and essential. Again, as Dejani said, not only for CCS, but for the whole energy transition. To achieve the 2050, 2060 net zero targets, 2030 forms a major milestone. We have seen the last year's amazing 2 years for CCS. We need to build on that momentum. We need to see actual funding, investment decisions. We need to see actual projects running on the ground. And for CCS to be recognized as per the IPCC report, the IEA scenarios, the scenarios we run, and all the entities where CCS is essential for the decarbonization and achieving the net zero and the 1.5 target. So this is what I'm looking for in the coming COP, that being an inclusive COP of all solutions, all industries, that CCS will take its right size and right recognition as one of the instrumental tools to fight climate change and to achieve net zero. And when we talk about CCS, I talk about carbon capture from a source, carbon direct air capture, natural-based solution. It doesn't matter. We need all of the above, but we need to agree, all of us globally, that we really do need to all of the above solutions and to push them forward. Collaboration at different level is instrumental. Countries need to work closely. Lesson learned need to be shared. Universities need to start preparing the youth for the years to come. We need more engineers, policymakers, and regulators in the coming year to support CCS and energy transition. And that put also additional pressure on the education sector. They need also to deliver their parts. So everyone needs to work together, and we all need to deliver our share of this challenge ahead of all of us. Thank you, Ignacy.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. And it seems 30 minutes go by pretty fast. But I'd like to highlight one key takeaway from this conversation, which was the urgency, the need to continue developing, continue pushing to advance CCUS. As we said, none of the projected scenarios will become realistic if we don't continue pushing for CCUS. There's no way we're going to achieve the keeping global warming below the 1.5 Celsius degrees before the end of the decade. I'd like to thank you, our three featured guest speakers today, Dr. Tijani Niaz, Senior Sustainability Strategist at Saudi Aramco, Adam Siemiński, former President and Senior Advisor to the Board at CAPSARC, and Dr. Mohammed Abu Sahra, Head of the MENA region at the Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute. Thank you for participating.